So obviously I had given God and religion a lot of thought, as far back as the Lobster Boy, of course. But never enough to do anything about it. And then a couple of years ago, more than a couple now, our youngest daughter, Gussie, Billy mentioned, was afflicted with a life-threatening eating disorder. And all the doctors, years of therapy, rehab, there was nothing, no answers, nothing we could do for our precious, funny baby. And a couple of days later, I'm watching TV, and on TV is a young priest, really good looking. I have my glasses on, really good looking. First, I think I'm looking at a remake of the Thornbirds. You know what I mean? Richard Chandler? No. His name was Father Jonathan Morris. Perhaps some of you have heard of him. Really good looking priest. And he was on talking about a book he had just written called The Promise, about how one can find grace through suffering. Well, suffering I had down, grace I need a little work. So I buy Father Jonathan's book, and it was really amazing. It was very comforting to me, the way he wrote about God, and the way he wrote about religion, and the way he wrote about suffering. So what I did was what any of us would do. Of course, I went to see a psychic. Now, I had seen this psychic when I was 22 years old. I was in crisis. My girlfriend had left me for a handyman I had hired to fix our toilet. And I was crushed, you know, and I didn't know what to do. My friends said, oh gosh, we know this great psychic. Go to see him. I said, I don't need a psychic. I need a girlfriend and a plumber, you know. I go to see this guy, Frank Andrews, and he's unbelievable. I was 22. He predicted everything pretty much everything that happened in my life. I'd become a writer, I'd do this, I'd learn the guitar, all this kind of stuff. And so I thought maybe this time Frank would see something hopeful for Gussie. So I go down there. Frank fans out the tarot cards. And he looks at the tarot cards, and he looks up at me and he goes, never get in a hot air balloon. And I said, well, do you see anything about Gussie? And he goes, no, it's murky, you know. So when I left his townhouse, I was pretty dejected. I'm walking down the steps of this townhouse, and I'm feeling kind of like, you know. And at that moment, the most amazing thing. A car pulls up right in front of me. Out steps a young priest, but not just any priest, the Thornbirds guy. Father Jonathan steps right out in front of me. And I go, Father, I got your book on my bedstand, you know? And he smiles and he walks towards me and extends his hand, and I shake it. And I don't know where this came from, but I said, Father, do you think you might have a couple of minutes to talk to me sometime? And he said, did you pay full price for the book? And then he says, you can find me right here. And he turns around and points to Old St. Patrick's Cathedral, directly across from the psychic. Now, I had been on Mulberry Street 1,000 times, but it was as if the cathedral hadn't even been there until he pointed to it. And we talked for a while, and he suggested that I call him and we make an appointment, we'll have some coffee, just like a regular person. And true to his word, he makes time for me, and I go to see him, and I'm nervous, you know. I'm not used to talking to a man of God, you know what I mean? I've worked with a lot of big stars who thought they were God. But Father John is different. He has this quality, the reality of God, foregone conclusion. Not even a discussion. So I found myself telling him about all these things that seemed like coincidences. The old craggy mystical guy in the desert. The homeless sandwich bum knowing my name. My having his book and looking up, and he's right in front of me. And Father John says, well, you know, there's no coincidences. That the Lord has a plan and there's a supernatural reality. And which is how all these things began to feel to me. And he said, yeah, sure, because you've been looking for something deeper And sometimes we come to God through suffering, and sometimes we lose God through suffering. And that's exactly how everything felt. And then he said something that I don't hesitate to even bring up. It's not even germane to the story. I don't even know why I would mention it, ladies and gentlemen. He mentioned that his favorite Seinfeld episode was the cafe, which I happened to write. And he even did an impression of Babu Bhatt going, "You and a bad man, Jenny, you bad man." It needed work, but for a priest, he was pretty good. I don't even know why I mentioned it, but anyway. I go to see Father John again, and it's just great to be around him. And I had all these questions, and he said, "Look, why don't you go take some classes?" And I go, "Okay," so I go take some classes, and I learned more about Judaism than I had ever known. For example, did you know that in Exodus, in the Bible, unlike the movie The Ten Commandments, nowhere in Exodus does Edward G. Robinson go, "Where's the Messiah now?" I don't know when I first really seriously began to think about converting. It was such a gradual process, I didn't know that I was in it. I always liked Jesus as a person. To me, he had a James Dean, Bob Dylan rebel thing about him that I liked. I was never deep enough to wrestle with the concept of his being the Son of God. Although I must tell you honestly that I many times wondered if I had been around at the time, would I have been a disciple? Of course, there wouldn't have been room for me in the painting of the Last Supper. But since it was a Seder, I could have been at the cousin's table. No one could say, "Cousin's table, over here." I would have been in the painting. I could have been on the house. Of course, the disciples had the extra benefit of seeing the miracles. You know, I mean, hey, you hear what happened to Lazarus? Lazarus is dead. Not anymore. No. Not dead. Nope. Of course, I wondered, you know, as I began to get more into it, I wondered, how am I going to tell my mother? You know what I mean? I'm going to tell my mother. I mean, she wasn't religious, but I'm a Jewish guy, So, I had this idea. Next time I ran into Father Jonathan, I casually snuck up to this idea. I said, "Father John, old St. Pat's never puts on any musical comedy." Because my mother, it would go so much easier with Mom if I could tell her the church had offered me the role of Riff in West Side Story. And they were even considering a more mature Maria out of this. Of course, I knew there'd be more important things to consider. Even more important things to consider. More certain sacrifices. As we know, I tend to be a little obsessive. I don't know if you've noticed it, but so what I would give up for Lent became my full-time occupation. That was all I could think about. I'm still a Jew, I'm one little obsessing. What the heck? What am I going to give up for Lent? I don't smoke or drink, so I decided to give up porn. Now, I watch that much porn just when we have electricity. But then again, all my sins washed away at my baptism. Okay? Especially that one of my taking all the amenities from certain five-star hotels. Even if I was just visiting a friend. I still have a medicine cabinet full of lotion from the Crillon Hotel in Paris. I also took a robe. I could start with that at my first confession, which was anxiety-provoking. Okay, nervous-making. But on the good side, because of all our medical bills, I had to give up going to the shrink. And I always felt like therapy was, like confession for Jews. The only difference is a priest won't rush you through your session on Friday to beat the traffic out to the end. That's pretty much the only real about my first confession that really made me very nervous was that I wanted it to be with Father John, and he had a good impression of me. I didn't want to disappoint him. So what I figured it was almost like I was a Broadway show and he was Ben Brantley. That's how I looked. So, like a Broadway show, I think, I'm going to do? I'm going to take my first confession out of town, workshop it. I'm going to workshop it in some parishes in another borough. Bring it in. Bring it in when it's tight, But then I thought, then sanity made one of its all so infrequent appearances. And I thought, none of it matters. All that matters is that I'm honest with myself and with God. And it doesn't really matter what anybody else thinks. And that's when I knew I had found faith. And it's like Father John had finally explained the lobster boy to me. Now, I'm not saying that I became a Catholic because of the lobster boy. Yeah, I am saying that. I am saying that. My mother was great about it. She says, you're Catholic. It makes you call me more often, fine. But you have to call me more often. And my friends were great. I was a little nervous telling all my friends, in the comedy business. They're all in the comedy business. I knew they'd torture me, work me over pretty bad. And my dearest pal, Paul Schaefer, from the Letterman show, the Paul who was with me with the homeless guy, he was, he's a very observant Jew, one of the moralist, hippest cats in the world. He threw me a Tom Leopold's Absolutely Last Days a Jew roast. True story. True. At Sammy's Romanian restaurant. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect because I had eaten there 10 years before and the meal had finally worked its way. So I was ready to go back. It was wonderful timing for me. And my friend Harry Shearer came in full Hasidic rabbi, big hat, the whole thing, performed an intervention. Kamala, lock the doors, Kamala! The kitchen crew went crazy. They thought it was immigration. They didn't know. And everybody tortured me and made fun of me, and it really was one of the greatest nights of my whole life. And the evening ended with a gospel choir that Paul had hired to back us up on "Oh Happy Day, Oh Happy Day," and it was one of the greatest nights of my life. And that Sunday I was baptized. Did the world change? No. Does my daughter still suffer? She does suffer a bit, yeah. But in lots of ways, I don't suffer as I did. And I think that's because I found that, I'd beat around a burning bush. I found faith, and I really didn't realize how much I had missed it till I got some of it. So. Isn't it amazing in this day and age we can make it on a working wage? Isn't it amazing when we turn the page, the chapter's new? Isn't it amazing all the luck we've had? Our good luck always trumps our bad. You're a mother now, and I'm a dad. It amazes me. I had a dream last night. There was the fight. I was trying to make the whole world right, but it can't be done. You're the engine, captain, you're the glue. That's why this boy will stick with you. Isn't it amazing what the world we knew is coming to? We'll make it too. I had a dream last night. My father stood in the light. He said, "Kid, you did all right for everyone." Good night, and thank you very much.